I just 3D printed and painted a bunch of these pretty sweet little dwarf miniatures, and in this week's video, I'm gonna be handcrafting them some hopefully pretty cool modular dwarf themed terrain. Hey guys, welcome back to Black Magic Craft. This week's episode is sponsored by Titan Forge, and they are the inspiration for this week's build. Titan Forge is a company that models and sells really high quality themed miniatures that you can download and print yourself at home. It's getting harder and harder to ignore the accessibility and cost effectiveness of home 3D printing miniatures. They make their products available via Patreon. You pay 10 bucks a month, gets you in the door, and you get access to that month's set of models. Every month they release at least 12 miniatures, 40 some bases, and terrain. It's a lot. They release a lot every single month that you get for 10 bucks. So it's pretty good. The models are always themed each month. So February is dwarves. And I decided to only print a couple of the small ones because that's all I could get painted in time for this video. But this set includes some big ass models that are really damn cool, like a big dragon and a crazy mech dwarf and a whole bunch of really cool dwarven themed terrain. But every month is a different theme, and next month they're actually doing a split theme that's both sci-fi and fantasy. But let's say you don't want to join up to a subscription Patreon thing for your files. You don't have to. They actually make all of their previous models available for a la carte purchasing via myminifactory.com. You can go in there and just buy what you want, stuff from older sets, whatever. And the nice thing is that if you're a current patron and you want to get some of the older models, they do give a 50% discount to current patrons for those older models. So it's still a good deal. It's a pretty good deal overall. But I know some of you are going, 3D printing. While the sponsor for the video is 3D printing related, the build is going to be handcrafted. I was thinking of doing a diorama for these guys, but the minis are so cool, I want to be able to use them in my game. So I didn't want to tie them into a diorama. Instead, I'm going to build some kind of modular terrain. I don't have any dwarven terrain. In general, one of the most used bits of scatter terrain in my arsenal is my little pillars. I figured it would make sense to make some dwarven ones, as they could instantly be dropped on any battle mat or tiles and emote that dwarven vibe. My buddy Michael at TWS a few years ago did a really nice set of dwarven dwarven foam pillars. I'm gonna use that as inspiration for this build. I haven't gone back to reference it. I saw that video a few years ago, so I'm just gonna kind of do it from memory because I wanna kind of half come up with my own style for these, but there's certainly some inspiration there. I will put a link to that video so you can check that one out as well and maybe combine the two and figure out what's best for you. I don't have much of a plan. Wish me luck. I'm gonna be using XPS insulation foam, and I am gonna be using the German Styrodur brand, but I wanna make it exceptionally clear here. The only reason I'm choosing this over the pink Foamular or the blue Dow, it's the thickest one I have on hand. It doesn't matter what XPS foam you're using, you want something that is thick so you can make thick pillars, and I only have 1/2 inch pink foam. Ignore the fact I'm using this. What matters is that it is thick. I'm gonna cut some square pillars and then some octagon bases. And for size, it's gonna be super scientific. I'm not gonna measure this, but based on this, it's about 35 millimeters square. That looks like a good size. Break a wire, started filming almost every single time. Never fails. Round 2, fight. All right, for height, I'm gonna be adding bases to these, which are gonna build them up in height. So don't need to be too tall. Eyeball, we're gonna say 70 millimeters. All the people who get mad at Imperial get the benefit today of me using the numbers on the table. Whoop, there we go. Let's just do this for the last one. but I need a base. And I think I want these bases to be octagons. First thing I'm going to do is break down some of this giant piece here so I have an easier piece to work with. Don't worry, there's an open window. Now to make the octagon, I'm going to use this nifty little jig from Shifting Lands. Slap your foam onto the jig. Now I'm just going to guess here on size and see how this looks. The way this works then is you take this out of the jig and turn it and then run it through again, and you just repeat this for all of the sides. And now I have an octagon. And it's a little large, but that's okay, because I think I want to do 2 layers here. I want to step it up. And I can take this one shape and break it down into however many pieces I need. Let's call it 10 millimeter. But I'm not going to want it just to be like that. I want another layer, so I'm going to make another octagon that is smaller. I should have paid attention to what I had this set at the first time, but I'm winging it. All right, all right, all right. That looks pretty good. Now this is all well and good, but what makes dwarven architecture really cool and interesting are those nice triangular pieces that are layered. I need to make some of those. I'm going to take my extras here, slice them down a few millimeters smaller than they already all are on all directions. Now I need to cut these into a point. I need to set my wire at the angle. In theory, I should just be able to do that, flip this, and do that. Hopefully that's even. Yes, those are the same. Set this back to 90 degrees. Now I can cut these into very thin layers. So now I made up some more blocks that are the same as the first, although I cut them a little bit shorter because the idea is decoratively stacking these down lower. But I also want them to be a little bit narrower in this direction. So the first thing I'm going to do is just shave off a little here on each side so that you get a stacking effect like this. And again, I'll just cut them down into thin slivers like the first ones. All right, let's do some assembly line work here. We'll start with these bases. I think I'm gonna use hot glue for these 2 pieces so that they're bonded together real quick and easy. The hot glue gives me enough time to position them. It sets up fast enough that as soon as I let go, we're done. You know, in retrospect, maybe I should have actually used PVA glue for this because the hot glue has a thickness and I've got a gap here, which I may or may not fill in later. I'm not sure yet. For these pieces, I am absolutely gonna switch to PVA glue. A little bit of water for the brush, and we're just gonna start gluing. I think my plan of attack here is going to be put on one side and then move on to the next pillar so that this can dry and not slide around on me while I'm working. We're going to jump back and forth between pillars here. I'm going to make it real clear that I've never made these before. I didn't make a test piece. This is me learning right along with you guys, which is often the case when I make my videos. So I learned a couple things doing this. One is that it actually didn't make sense to do one side, then go to this one, then this one, then this one, and then back and turn it. I wasn't very efficient, and also this glue takes too long to dry, and even by the time I made it through, it wasn't dry yet. So it's pointless, and I just ended up doing one way all the way around. I also noticed that I had to use a fair bit of glue. It's dangerous to put it on too thin because then it dries out very quickly and doesn't make a good bond. So I was putting it on pretty heavy on the piece, and I was also taking a little bit of extra glue and wiping it on the bigger interior piece so that I was gluing wet to wet, which actually made the bond much stronger. Since I knew I'd have to wait for this glue to dry, I used the same time to apply some joint compound into the seams here to fill that gap that I'd mentioned earlier. This way I could take advantage of both of these things drying at the same time. I got to assemble these. But before I do that, I do want to add a little bit of stone texture. So I'm going to do this separately while they're apart. I don't want to go too crazy with this. I feel like dwarven stone texture, architecture is actually a lot smoother and nicer than maybe a decrepit dungeon or something like that made by man or some other race. If you want to add a little bit of damage, you can take like a knife and chop away some little tiny gouges. But again, I wouldn't go too crazy with this. You can add a little bit to these. If you make this too extreme, then it kind of negates all the nice carving work that you did making all of these nice hard edges. The top is a tricky thing. Now, in my mind, I picture these representing pillars that actually go much taller to a high ceiling. So that's why I don't want to break these and make them look textured or add a cap. You could add a cap on it, but then that represents them being the top. Or you could chip away and make it look like the interior of the stone, but then it looks like ruined pillars. I really want to imply that these continue up to a really tall, grand ceiling, which makes finishing this really tricky. But I'm just going to add a slight bit of texture just to kind of blend it in with the rest and call it a day. Now to attach these, could use hot glue, but I don't want to end up with that thickness problem again. I think I want to use PVA. Now this is going to have one problem. It's going to take a long time to dry. It's going to be hard to hold it in place. So I want to try something here. I don't know if this is going to work. I'm going to use a long screw and actually attach the base to the pillar. Now hopefully this will pull them nice and tight together and have the added bonus of adding a little bit of weight to the piece. These pillars have a very wide footprint, so weight is not super important. These are not going to fall over or move around on the table, but adding a little bit of extra weight never hurts. The nice thing with XPS foam is that a screw actually will drive itself into it. As long as you don't overdo it, it will actually hold. And it sucks itself in, countersinks itself, and holds this very, very tightly. So now I don't actually have to wait for this glue to set up to move on to the next phase. Actually, that pulled it so tight that it pulled out some of this joint compound that wasn't quite cured yet, which is nice. So I just gotta do all of these and then actually let the joint compound dry up before moving on to Mod Podge. We're moving along pretty darn good here. I'm actually quite impressed with how quickly I was able to get to this stage. This is still day one, and not quite a full day of working, and I got the pieces sculpted, finished, and Mod Podged so I can start painting. If you're new around here and you haven't heard me say this a million times already, the reason I put the Mod Podge on is to make the foam a little bit more hard, a little bit more durable, and also seal up all those points where you got the layers so nothing's peeling off, and overall it just makes everything more better. So for the paint job, I'm gonna keep it pretty simple. I'm just gonna use 3 tones of gray. A dark gray, a medium gray, and a light gray. Probably just homemade black wash. Maybe I'll brush on some metallics. I'm not sure. I'm thinking about maybe brushing on some silvers or golds to kind of tie in with these little dwarven dudes here. I don't know, it seems to make sense. We'll see, I'm not sure. Let's paint these things. All right, day 1 on this project is completed. It's now the next day. All of this is nice and dry. One small thing I would change if I were doing this again, I textured the stonework kind of after assembly, or after these 2 separate parts were assembled. And that was a little bit of a mistake because I wasn't able to get the texture on the top surface of the lower base. And it kind of shows after paint. So in the future, I would texture these pieces before gluing them together. Not a big deal though. I ended up not putting any wash on these. I just did dry brushing the 3 grays, and then I dry brushed with a metallic gold, which I thought was a nice little touch to highlight the edges and make it look more dwarven, even though, like, really, why is that more dwarven? I don't know, but it is. It looks good. This is technically done. I mean, these are dwarven pillars. They're good to go. They're done. But I want to do something a little bit extra on some of them. These dwarves from Titan Forge, they're not like typical dwarves. They're a little bit steampunky, I guess. They're definitely like inventors or tinkerers. They got all this crazy equipment. They kind of remind me of the Is It Guild from Ravnica, if you're into MTG. I want to make a couple of these pillars sort of play on that theme, and I want to make them look like they're in some kind of dwarven steampunk. I shouldn't use the word steampunk. I don't want to offend anybody that loves steampunk, but I want to make them look kind of science labby, add some pipes and machinery and stuff as if they're part of this dwarven experimenter's laboratory. I'm not going to do it to all of them because I want to have some just plain for regular game use. I'm thinking maybe I'll pick 2 of them as kind of centerpiece ones to really embellish. I went to Michael's and I bought a whole bag of random stuff. Little beads and gems and gears and pieces that I can use to adorn these. With these sort of little bits, they're actually very, very cheap when you consider them per piece. The problem is you gotta like buy these big packs, and it actually can be a little bit expensive to buy a bunch of packs when they're all like, you know, $5 to $10 each, and you're only gonna be using a few of them. So I'm always really reluctant to buy them, and my collection of these kind of bits is actually a lot smaller than some others. I decided to, you know, buy a couple different things that would be useful for this project and useful in the future, I think, for other things. Let's play around and see what looks cool. So I have an assortment of these little round, I don't know, bubble bead jewel things. I thought they might look cool as kind of domes. Probably end up painting them copper to match the metallic piping and whatnot, but I picked this color because it kind of has a cool oily iridescent look. I also got a mix of gemstones that are different colors that might look cool. I already had some that are much smaller, but now I have a good range of big and small. Some gears that I'll maybe use, but I'm gonna be careful. I don't like the idea of just slapping gears on things that don't make sense, but I might use them as backing for these gems. I also already have some little ones here I might use. I got a couple different wires and necklace things that look like cabling or rope, and then I wanna add some pipes to this, some copper pipes. And originally I was planning on doing the Q-tip method, or styrene rod or plastic rod method, and bending it. Well, what if I just use some copper wire? So I got some small gauge copper wire that I can hopefully make into pipes. The tricky part is making them straight enough to look good, because wire bends easily. And then I thought, oh, why don't I just take some regular household 14-2 wire, strip it, and that could also work. It's a little bit thicker, gives me 2 different sizes, and shows you an example of something you might have kicking around. I'm just gonna play around and fiddle a bit and see where I get. And at the end, we can review what ended up working. Well, that actually turned out pretty darn cool. It was a bit of a challenge with the old shaky hands, but all these little bits really did a nice job of decorating these pillars in a really ridiculous way that kind of looks like an insane dwarven laboratory. I learned a few things along the way though. While the copper wire is nice to use because you can easily bend those corners, and unlike styrene rods or the plastic sticks or whatever, you don't have to heat them up, but they're hard to keep straight because they're so soft they want to wave a bit. And I tried to straighten them out a bit with needle nose. Didn't work great, but I'm not gonna lose too much sleep over it. Just something to keep in mind if you're going that route. Also, I found that when clipping the wire with side cutters or the snipper on the needle nose, it kind of cuts to a point because it cuts and crimps, which made it kind of difficult to attach it to flat surfaces. And this was the same with this necklace chain that I used. So it would be a good idea to keep a nail file, not a nail file, like a metal file on hand to make a nice flat surface so that when you have your wire, it can butt in nicely. I did find later hobby snippers, these kind of side cutters did also cut a flatter cut than something like this. I used this necklace to make some cabling because it has a really great texture to it that kind of looks like cabling, but it was a challenge to work with. It's floppy and it doesn't just like hold its shape how you bend it, and it's hard to bend it in a tighter radius than this. So it was a little bit tricky. In the end, you know, worked pretty darn cool. I used a lot of actual copper here and, you know, this kind of goldish copper chain in the hopes that I wouldn't have to paint things, but it's not really going to work out that way. It's not really cohesive, and sometimes real material doesn't look right in, you know, context with other things that are painted. So I'm going to quickly take some of this copper paint and just lightly paint out all of the real metal stuff. The nice thing is because it's already basically that color, I don't have to be too finicky. Also, this will cover up the joints where I used a lot of super glue and accelerant to make these joints and hold things in place. There's a few spots where that went a little bit crazy and caused some hazing, or maybe my little holes are too big. I'm gonna actually go in with a little bit of weathering probably and do some drips off of these pipes to hide that sort of thing. And then I think I can call these done. Well, I will say that personally, I'm very happy with this project. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy it? I hope that you did. If you did, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments section below. It's kind of like a two-phase or two-tiered project. One is just your basic classic dwarven pillars that are super useful for D&D, and I would assume some war games. And then you could take that idea and enhance it with some ridiculous add-on bits to make it more steampunky and weird. Or if you don't want to do dwarven stuff, you could just take some of the ideas shown here and apply it to other projects. I want to thank Titan Forge for sponsoring this video and mostly for inspiring this build with their cool models. Again, if you want to check them out, I will put links in the description below. Now, if you want to build these, but you're finding yourself discouraged because, say, you don't have a hot wire cutter or whatever, don't let that stop you. Don't let that limit you. This is stonework. You can absolutely just make these by cutting things with a blade. It'll just require more time and patience, and you might not get the same degree of accuracy over many pieces, but does it really matter on stonework? The hot wire table is really just a tool that makes it easier. You don't need it to make it. Please, just understand you don't need it to make it. And even if you can't get foam, take the idea, find some material that you can have. Heck, make it out of cardboard and paper. If you want these, just build them. Don't worry about what you do or do not have. However, saying that, if you do want to make your life easier and you want to pick up some of the tools that I use to make my life easier, head over to blackmagicraft.ca. There I have links and listings of all the stuff that I use regularly. See why I use it and grab some for yourself. If you like the videos that I make here and you want to help me keep making them, you can do so by supporting the channel on Patreon. That support goes a long way to allowing me to dedicate the time that it takes to make these videos each and every week. Also, it gives you access to a great little community of like-minded, awesome crafters and cool people in the Blackmagic Craft Fellowship. That's it for this week, guys. I sincerely hope you learned something and got inspired to build something cool for yourself. I will see you again next week. Cheers.